the situation on the border continues to get worse and worse, and this is driven explicitly at this point by Joe Biden's terrible policy. According to Axios, the Biden administration kept a Trump-era policy known as Title 42 as a tool to quickly turn back adults and families who illegally cross the southern border. But, according to new Department of Homeland Security data leaked to Axios, it has not been used at all for families. So Trump had a policy. If you show up on the border, we force you to remain in Mexico while we adjudicate your case. You can apply for asylum in Mexico. You can't cross the border and just disappear into the interior. And that was Title 42. But DHS now says that if you arrive as a family, they're not going to do that. In fact, the data shows an average of just 13% of nearly 13,000 family members attempting to cross the U.S.-Mexico border were returned to Mexico between March 14th and March 21st using the public health order, which essentially says the U.S. can close the border to non-essential travel because of the COVID virus. It's a sign of how the administration is struggling to keep up with the migration surge and has recently been hamstrung by Mexico's inability to take in more families the U.S. would otherwise expel. Well, actually, it is not a sign of how the administration is struggling to keep up with the migration surge. It's a sign of how they are unwilling to keep up with the migration surge. They're saying, let everybody in. Okay, the same administration that tells you that Florida is terrible because it's wide open and COVID's going to spread and we're all going to die and keep masking up. They're not even using the coronavirus pandemic to reject people at the border that we have not tested for COVID. That's how ridiculous and incoherent this administration's policy is. The other 87% won't remain in the U.S. indefinitely, according to Axios, but they will be allowed into the U.S. to go through immigration proceedings, which means they will stay in the U.S. indefinitely. Proceedings can take years. The DHS spokesperson said, well, 1 week of stats doesn't reflect the full picture. Our policy remains that families are expelled, and in a situation where expulsion is not possible, they are placed into removal proceedings. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says the process of deporting those families sometimes, quote, takes a minute to ensure there's proper transportation and steps in place to do that. No, what's happening right now is that you guys have decided that you are just going to let a ton of people in. And Joe Biden has incentivized all of this. It is perfectly clear at this point. The good news, though, is that Kamala Harris is happy about it, apparently. So Kamala Harris was asked whether she's going to go visit the border. She's not, by the way. Kamala Harris apparently is now going to visit Florida. She tweeted out yesterday, help is here. She put out a tweet, help is here. She wasn't landing at the border. She was landing in Florida. Guess what, Vice President? We don't need you here. In fact, the great success of the state of Florida is because we have explicitly rejected everything you could have possibly recommended. You're from California, the state that I rejected because they went entirely the wrong direction. Do not come here and bring your crappy policy here. The state of Florida voted against Joe Biden and Kamala Harris for a reason. And it's because they reject the kind of help is here. Help is here, says Kamala Harris. Yes, we desperately in Florida need the help of Kamala Harris, an incompetent senator who couldn't get 0% in a California primary before she was plucked out of obscurity, thanks to the fact that Joe Biden wanted a black female for his vice president. We need her help desperately. So she arrives in Florida, and she then is asked about whether she's going to head down to the border. And she breaks out the Joker laugh, which makes perfect sense because this is super funny stuff, guys.
Do you have plans to visit the border?
Not today. But I have before, and I'm sure I will again.
Where is the Batman? What the? She's got the worst. I mean, that's a bad nervous tick. That is a lot of people have nervous ticks. That is a bad one. She's asked a difficult question, and she starts cackling. You're like, oh my God. You wonder why the Democratic Party needs to wheel around a not fully sentient, not fully alive human as president of the United States? Because all that stands between Kamala Harris, a terrible, awkward, horrific politician in the presidency, is that old man. That's why they have to just keep pretending that everything is fine in Biden land. Because here is the thing. Kamala Harris, as the face of this policy, looks very, very different. Not because of race or gender, but just because she's terrible at this than Joe Biden does. Okay, in any case, the situation on the border, again, continues to be bad. The media were barred from these migrant facilities where we now have a multiple of people who are being kept and housed. But footage did leak from inside the migrant facilities. Project Veritas got a hold of some of the footage. Here's what that looked like.
Project Veritas has obtained never-before-seen photographs of what it actually looks like inside this facility.
Children sleeping inches.
Shocking images.
Oh my goodness.
Showing people wrapped up in what looks like metal foil, laying on the ground, their faces covered. Why won't the administration be honest about this? Why won't they show you these images? We have now obtained these photos inside this facility. Now, these photos are
Wow.
very, very grim. Project Veritas has also learned these photographs were taken in the last few days.
Okay, so if you actually could see the photos, this is why you should subscribe so you can see the photos. If you actually see the photos, they're astonishing. I mean, honestly, it looks like a bunch of people wrapped in aluminum foil lying down inches from one another. Inches. You want to talk about a COVID super spreader event? This would be what that looks like. Okay, and they are being put... Now, don't worry, those are not kids in cages, guys. This is Happy Fun Time Camp with Joe Biden. It's all great over there. Everything's fine. According to the Biden administration, not a crisis. And also, everybody should keep coming, but also they should stay away because it's awkward right now. But also, the media shouldn't be allowed in because if they see those pictures, then it might be bad for the administration. Even CNN finally catching on. They say, yeah, it turns out that we now have migrant children who are essentially staying in jail cells. Here was CNN finally doing its job.
You have more kids coming into U.S. custody, but just not enough space to put them in shelter. So that means that these kids are staying in Border Patrol facility for prolonged periods of time. And those are facilities that are not intended for them. They look like jail-like conditions, like prison cells with concrete walls and concrete benches. And these kids are spending more than the 3-day limit that they're supposed to, according to federal law. So the administration racing here to find enough space for these kids that is suitable for them.
Okay, yeah, are they racing? Are they racing, though? Because I feel like they're not racing so much. And I feel like if they wanted to make sure that kids were not along the border, they would reject families at the border, which apparently they're not doing. Because it turns out families generally have kids, but they're not rejecting the families. They've fostered this border crisis, and every single person knows it. In fact, NBC's Steve Gutierrez said that migrants say they are now being encouraged by the Biden administration.
We have spoken with several migrants over the last several days, Andrea, both on this side of the border and over in Mexico, in Matamoros, Mexico, that said that they were encouraged by the change in administration. Many of them didn't know the specifics of President Biden's border policies, but what they did know is that he was not President Trump. And some of them did feel that now would be the time to come to the border.
So actually, that's Gabe Gutierrez. Sorry about the first name screw up. Gabe Gutierrez, the NBC News correspondent at the border, fully saying that these migrants are arriving and they are saying they're doing so because of Biden. But don't worry, according to the administration, it's not because of Biden. Everything is totally fine. Now, the media are finally beginning to catch on to all of this. The media are beginning to pretend to care. So the media have decided that they don't like the fact that there is now lack of border access, which is good. I'm glad that they have woken up to the problem that is the lack of transparency inside the Biden administration. So, here are some of the members of the media beginning to have questions for the Biden administration about why you won't let us in. Here's Katie Tur from NBC News saying that the lack of border access is somewhat disturbing. Well, yeah, it is.
The Biden administration kept talking about transparency, and we're not getting any transparency here with what is happening at the border, that we have to get those images from a congressman who won't say where he got those images. It's very frustrating for not just journalists, but for the American public who want to know what's going on inside those facilities, those disturbing images.
Okay, so Katie Tur calling it out, Jake Tapper of CNN now calling it out.
Today we saw this rare look inside these facilities since the Biden administration has not granted news media access to the facilities, citing COVID restrictions, despite the president's promise in his inaugural address to always level with you. Blocking access to the news media is not leveling with the American people, Mr. President.
Yeah, they're not leveling with the American people. They're refusing to release statistics. And by the way, who are you going to believe, the administration or your own eyes? Jen Psaki said literally yesterday that as these pictures were emerging of these kids sleeping directly next to each other, and adults, by the way, sleeping directly next to each other in large numbers inside what looked like essentially plastic bubbles. She said, don't worry, we're following all the CDC guidelines. Oh, are you? It looks super safe over there.
These kids are tested. If they need to be quarantined, they are quarantined. We also follow CDC guidelines to ensure that they are kept safe. One of the reasons that it took us some time to have some of these facilities or some of the shelters open to larger groups of kids is because we wanted to follow those CDC guidelines.
But where else in the country would it be okay to have 400 people in a space for 260 during the pandemic?
Well, again, Peter, we're closely following the CDC guidelines.
No, you are not. You really, really, really are not. You have said that kids cannot be in schools. Okay, kids can't be in schools if they are 3 feet or less apart. Okay, but you are keeping these kids inches from one another, and it's totally fine. Which suggests this is not really about COVID on the one hand, and also they just don't want to do anything about the immigration problem. According to the Washington Post, over the last 3 weeks, the average number of teenagers and children crossing into the United States without parents has topped 550 per day. Border officials are on pace to take in more than 17,000 minors this month, which would be an all-time high. This is obviously a crisis. Biden has had a markedly different approach than his predecessors to an influx of Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said was on pace to be the largest in the last 20 years. 20 years. So far, they're just adding capacity to shelters and other facilities to absorb the influx, declining to implement policies that would send minors back because the administration considers the policies morally unacceptable, which means they want this to happen. That is their goal, which suggests that it's all about the agenda. It's all about the political agenda. Just keep letting illegal immigrants into the country, and everything will be fine. And by the way, this is the same administration that said if you come after January 1st, we're not going to simply amnesty you. Does anyone believe that, including the illegal immigrants who are crossing the border? Of course not. Facts don't care about your feelings, and it's a fact that The Ben Shapiro Show is the largest conservative podcast in the nation. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to stay up to date on all of our content.